I consume a lot of books, like a lot, and specifically audiobooks. If I'm listening to anything and I'm not actively studying references, then odds are I've got a book in my AirPods, whether I'm on the bike or out running errands. And as much as I enjoy a great sci-fi and fantasy, shout out to Drew Hayes and Brandon Sanderson, I'm much more likely to be listening to a book focused on productivity or creative consciousness. So on today's show, I want to go over 5 books that have really transformed my way of thinking and helped in my career as a professional composer, even though they're not explicitly about the music industry. Plus, we're going to listen through the latest submission in my year of taxi, follow up on any returns or forwards, and I provide feedback on a cue written by a member of the 52 Cues community on this week's episode of the 52 Cues podcast. What is happening, everybody? This is Dave Croft, and welcome back to another episode of the 52 Cues podcast, a weekly podcast dedicated to all things production and library music, where we talk about industry topics and take deep dives into the different aspects of being a working production music composer. Plus, in my Year of Taxi update, we're going to check in on any returns or forwards and take a listen to this week's submission, which is a 4th contemporary hip-hop cue. And then a little bit later on, I'm going to give my thoughts on a lush orchestral cue written by 52 Cues community member Dan Maynard. So you definitely want to stick around for that. If this is your first time here, welcome. I'm so glad you found me. However you found me, I know you have a lot of options out there, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the audio podcast on the go. I just want to thank you for spending part of your day here with me. I also have to give a special word of thanks to the family, friends, and patrons of 52 Cues who help keep the podcast, the channel, and everything we do here going. We're 100% community supported, so you're not going to hear any ads for mattresses or meal plans, but if you want to learn more about how you can help support 52 Cues and also unlock extra perks like live streams, workshops, Zoom feedback sessions, and a ton more, then be sure to click on the links in the description or stick around because we're going to be talking more about that a little bit later in today's episode. So let's go ahead and check in on my Year of Taxi update. And I do have an update on an older cue. If you remember from a couple of weeks ago, a knockout round, which was a return. And, I kind of got loose on the podcast about it. Even though it didn't get forwarded along to Taxi, I did forward it along to one of my publishers, and I am thrilled to report that it actually made air just this past weekend on the NCAA tournament.
Come in for just one though. Keep it rolling.
We're excited to be playing again, playing together, having fun, and that's what we've been doing.
Once you get past the first game, you really enjoy
it. And so this was this past weekend, and it was 8-11. So that was prime time for the Penn State versus Texas game, and a really big long play, like almost 50-second play. And so I only share that just to encourage you that, in my whole Year of Taxi experiment that we're doing, that that's not always the end of the road. It's not always the end of the road. And so I just wanted to share that. That is an update on the life of that cue. And I firmly believe that no good cue goes unused. So believe, hashtag believe. All right. So I have returned now for a 4th time, which is actually across 2 different searches. And there's a ton of hip hop searches right now on Taxi. There's a contemporary hip hop instrumental that they ran a couple of weeks ago. There's another contemporary hip hop instrumental, which I think is for a different library, but similar references, including Spinnin' that I referenced previously, and that's what I really leaned in, that kind of drill. And then another Creed 2 track. This is running. That's kind of a little bit of what I leaned into this week. But they're also running, there's like a hip hop tension, there's a dramedy hip hop, and there was, for this one, a whole other hip hop search that I could have submitted these exact same cues, because some of them, I think 2 of the references were the same. I think they're from different libraries. And so folks, I'm here to tell you that hip hop is just world domination. And so if you are not into hip hop, that's fine. That's totally fine. But I would encourage you to explore this genre. There are so many different facets of it. It's becoming like you know how like electric guitar can show up across multiple genres. It's not just rock. Like hip hop beats and hip hop textures, they can absolutely show up across genres. So I encourage you to not be afraid of hip hop. And I can tell you, coming up in the podcast in a few weeks, I sat down and had a fantastic conversation with Anthony Clint Jr. of Clint Music Productions and Clint Productions, and we talked specifically about production music hip hop. So be on the lookout for that interview coming up a little bit later. So again, contemporary hip hop instrumentals needed by a top-notch production music library. Let's actually go into the brief here. And this is the exact same reference that we looked at last week. Well-produced hip-hop instrumentals with hooks, slick beats, top-notch arrangements, oozing with commercial mainstream appeal, and could work well for a variety of sync placements. So range from epic to fun, from trap to pop, anything in between. And so just be sure that the production is polished and any virtual sounds or samples you use are high quality and current sounding. So contemporary hip hop instrumentation, which means, no kind of throwback 90s G-funk, no, not really super sample based, right? It doesn't need to sound like kind of 2000s hip hop or anything. So 90 seconds to 3 minutes. And so the cue that I've got for today is called Baller Envy. Yeah, just a funny title. We'll see. And using more commercial hip hop form, which I got to tell you, in me, my internal phrase clock, which says, okay, we should be building. So it's a challenge of making sure that it's syncable, for lack of a better term, or editable would be a better way to say that, but also works in it gives the contemporary commercial hip hop vibe. And where the real challenge is the hook usage and how often you repeat the hook. How often, do you have to to get the hook out of the way? In a traditional kind of production music form, you kind of build and keep adding on to it until around the 50 second to 1 minute mark. But for hip hop cues, and especially for the screeners at Taxi, I know that they're not going to be okay with you rolling the hook for 50 straight seconds. So you've got to do something a little bit different. So here is a Baller Envy. right, so that was Baller Envy, and sprinkled in some of those orchestral sounds, some of the references that I pulled off outside of that, like listening to hip hop playlists and everything on Spotify or Apple Music, had some orchestral sounds, and knowing that the references also included from the Creed soundtrack, I felt like that was pretty safe. I actually played it for some folks over in the 52Q's family, and played it without the orchestral section and with it, and it was unanimous. Everybody's like, yes, include the orchestral sounds. I didn't want it to sound epic, right? So it's not an epic hip hop cue with these big aggressive string lines like Knockout Round, but we'll see. We'll see. This was my fourth hip hop cue, and I will be moving away from hip hop for the next couple of weeks. This is the plan, at least, focusing on some investigative tension instrumentals, and then circling back to tension or back to hip hop probably in week 14. That's the plan right now, assuming something doesn't kind of pop up. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see if they dig it. That brief closed yesterday, so I don't have any update on Gotta Get Medieval, or obviously for the one that I just submitted. But we'll see. We'll see if they dig it. But that's going to do it for my Year of Taxi update. So, books. Like I said in the intro, I love audiobooks. I mean, I also love podcasts, fair enough. If I'm out and about, I have a handful of podcasts that I enjoy listening to. The Graham Cochran podcast I enjoy, Make Music Income I enjoy. I also enjoy Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend, and the Scrubs Rewatch podcast, Fake Doctors, Real Friends. Those are really the only four that I listen to on the regular. But that only kind of gets me so far. The rest of the time that I'm listening to something, either in the car, on the bike, or whatever, doing chores around the house, running errands, I am listening to audiobooks. And specifically, audiobooks not about the music industry. I mean, there are fantastic books about the music industry that we've talked about. I mean, 52 Qs, the whole concept came out of Dan Graham's book, Library Composer's Guide to Library Music. So it's I am down with music books, but I find books outside of the music industry, books that talk about creativity, that talk about motivation, that talk about creativity, entrepreneurship, things like marketing. These are all really, really good things to have, because, you know, at the end of the day, this career, production music, is such a self-starting, entrepreneurial kind of one-person operation for the vast majority of us, that we need some buoying, we need some soul edification to help push us along. So I want to talk about specifically 5 books, many more, but these, last week I had my Mount Rushmore of plugins. I guess this is my Mount Rushmore of books, but it's 5. And then I have 2 kind of honorable mentions. And I promise not to Photoshop my face onto any national monuments. So, parenthetically, I spent way too long on that thumbnail. This is when I knew that I was like, okay, Dave, I am down this rabbit hole. If you don't know what I'm talking about the thumbnail from last week where I photoshopped my face onto Mount Rushmore. Anyway, so I want to talk about 5 books, specifically 5 non-music books that have really transformed my way of thinking. And what I want to do is I want to show you the book. We're going to have links to all these books in the description, and I actually want to play a clip from the audiobook so that you can kind of hear what I hear when I'm listening to these things. And the first book that I want to talk about is The Miracle Morning. I'm such a huge fan of this book, specifically Miracle Morning for writers. And they make miracle mornings for teachers, miracle mornings for entrepreneurs. So they make different miracle mornings. And the idea of the miracle morning came from Hal Elrod, And it basically talks and prescribes the idea that if you get up early in the day and you take advantage of everything that a morning routine has to offer, that it will spark a lot of creative energy and it will help build momentum in whatever career you're looking at. And so it really has transformed my life. I never considered myself a miracle morning, and I've talked about getting up early, before and everything, but that comes from this book, this Miracle Morning book, specifically, like I said, by Hal Elrod and Steve Scott and Honoree did this version because Hal Elrod has the concept, and then different professionals in the various industries will write on. So Honoree Corder is an author. Now, Miracle Morning for Writers is geared toward authors, not composers, because to my knowledge, there is not a Miracle Morning for composers or even for artists necessarily. So when I listened to this, every time they talked about words per day or words or length of time, I just kind of translated it to minutes. And just anytime they said writers, I thought to myself, writers of music. So that's Miracle Morning. And let's take a listen to a sample.
Chapter 1. Why Mornings Matter More Than You Think. How you start each morning determines your mindset and the context for the rest of your day. Start every day with a purposeful, disciplined, growth-infused, and goal-oriented morning, and you're virtually guaranteed to crush your day. Yet most writers start their days with procrastination, hitting the snooze button and sending the message to their subconscious that they don't have enough self-discipline to get out of bed in the morning, let alone do what's necessary to reach their writing goals. When the alarm clock beeps in the morning, consider it to be akin to life's first gift to us. It's the gift of time to dedicate to becoming the person you need to be to achieve all of your goals and dreams while the rest of the world is still asleep. You might be thinking, all of this sounds great, Steve, but I am not a morning person. I understand. I really do. You're not saying anything I haven't told myself 1,000 times before. And believe me, I tried and failed many times to take control of my mornings. But that was before I discovered the Miracle Morning. Stay with me for a minute. In addition to becoming a successful writer, I bet you also want to stop struggling and worrying about your finances, quit missing your goals, and release all of the intense and not so great emotions that go along with those challenges. Am I right? Then know this. Mornings are the key to all of it. More important than the time that you start your day is the mindset with which you start your day. Maybe your dream is to become a famous writer so that you can inspect your alarm clock's insides with a baseball bat and see what it's like to start your day on your time for a while. Trust me, I get it. And I often decide to start my day whenever I wake up naturally. However, when I do that, my Miracle Morning is the first part of my day and gets me in the right mindset to make the most of the rest of my day. Plus, there is a good chance that you are reading this book in the early stages of your author business, which means that you are probably paying your bills with a day job and writing on the side. If that's the case, then learning to implement your Miracle Morning routine with your day job is critical to exploding your writing efforts so that you can finally ditch that alarm clock for a few weekdays or forever and see how it feels. Here's the good news. It's worth it, and it is far more fun and rewarding than you might expect. But before we get into exactly how you can master your mornings, let me make the case for why. Because believe me, once you know the truth about mornings, you'll never want to miss one again. Why mornings matter so much. The more you dig into mornings, the more the proof mounts that the early bird gets a lot more than the worm. Here are just a few of the key advantages to laying off the snooze button. You'll be more proactive. Christoph Randler is a professor of biology at the University of Education in Heidelberg, Germany. In the July 2010 issue of Harvard Business Review, Randler found that people whose performance peaks in the morning are better positioned for career success. because they're more proactive than people who are at their best in the evening. You'll anticipate problems and head them off at the pass. Randler went on to surmise that morning people hold all of the important cards. They are better able to anticipate and minimize problems, are proactive, have greater professional success, and ultimately make higher wages. He noted that morning people are able to anticipate problems and handle them with grace and ease, which makes them better in business. You'll plan like a pro. Morning folks have the time to organize, anticipate, and plan for their day. Our sleepy counterparts are reactive rather than proactive, leaving a lot to chance. Aren't you more stressed when you sleep through your alarm or wake up late? Getting up with the sun, or before, lets you jumpstart the day. While everyone else is running around trying and failing to get their day under control, you'll be calm, cool, and collected. You'll have more energy. One of the components of your new Miracle Mornings will be morning exercise, which, in as little as a few minutes a day, sets a positive tone for the day. Increased blood to the brain will help you think more clearly and focus on what's most important. Fresh oxygen will permeate every cell in your body and increase.
So like I said, this really did transform my life. And the funny thing is I never considered myself a morning person. It's laughable. But once I got into the routine, I found that there was a magic to it. Now, the Miracle Morning is not for everybody. My wife, Shannon, Mrs. 52Qs, she is not a morning person at all. She does some of her best work in the middle of the night. And so what's interesting is there's often times where I will actually be getting up and then she will be coming to bed or have just been to bed just a couple of hours. And so it's not for everybody. And even if you don't take advantage of, getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, which is when my alarm goes off during the week, then the idea, though, that creating a routine and sticking to it really, really helps. And like I said, it quite literally transformed my life. So that is The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod, Steve Scott with Honoree Quarter. Check it out. The next book I want to talk about is The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. Now, Steven Pressfield is an author. He's the author of The Legend of Bagger Vance, along with many, many others, Tides of War, The Last of the Amazons, The Profession. And this is a book which is little vignettes of motivational ass-kicking. I listen to The War of Art at least once a year, because one of the thesis statements or thesis concepts of The War of Art is that anytime you go to set out to do something which is going to improve yourself, improve your career, improve your relationships, go into something new, you will be met with resistance. Resistance. And I'm going to read just a little bit from the book and then we'll listen to it. Resistance Greatest Hits. The following is a list, in no particular order, of those activities that most commonly elicit resistance. 1. The pursuit of any calling in writing, painting, music, film, dance, or any creative art, however marginal or unconventional. 2. The launching of any entrepreneurial venture or enterprise for profit or otherwise. 3. Any diet or health regimen. 4. Any program of spiritual advancement. 5. Any activities whose aim is tighter abdominals. 6. Any course or program designed to overcome an unwholesome habit or addiction. 7. Education of any kind. 8. Any act of political, moral, or ethical courage, including the decision to change for the better some unworthy pattern or thought or conduct in ourselves. 9. The undertaking of any enterprise or endeavor whose aim is to help others. 10. Any act that entails commitment of the heart, the decision to get married, to have a child, to weather a rocky patch in a relationship. And 11, the taking of any principled stand in the face of adversity. So in other words, any act that rejects immediate gratification in favor of long-term growth, health, or integrity, or expressed another way, any act that derives from our higher nature instead of our lower, any of these will elicit resistance. Here's a clip from the author himself.
I looked everywhere for the enemy and failed to see it right in front of my face. Have you heard this story? Woman learns she has cancer, 6 months to live. Within days, she quits her job, resumes the dream of writing Tex-Mex songs she gave up to raise a family, or starts studying classical Greek, or moves to the inner city and devotes herself to tending babies with AIDS. Women's friends think she's crazy. She herself has never been happier. There's a postscript. Woman's cancer goes into remission. Is that what it takes? Do we have to stare death in the face to make us stand up and confront resistance? Does resistance have to cripple and disfigure our lives before we wake up to its existence? How many of us have become drunks and drug addicts, developed tumors and neuroses, succumbed to painkillers, gossip, and compulsive cell phone use simply because we don't do that thing that our hearts, our inner genius, is calling us to? Resistance defeats us. If tomorrow morning, by some stroke of magic, every dazed and benighted soul woke up with the power to take the first step towards pursuing his or her dreams, every shrink in the directory would be out of business. Prisons would stand empty. The alcohol and tobacco industries would collapse, along with the junk food, cosmetic surgery, and infotainment businesses, not to mention pharmaceutical companies, hospitals, and the medical profession from top to bottom. Domestic abuse would become extinct, as would addiction, obesity, migraine, headaches, road rage, and dandruff. Look in your own heart. Unless I'm crazy, right now a still small voice is piping up, telling you as it has 10,000 times the calling that is yours and yours alone. You know it. No one has to tell you. And unless I'm crazy, you're no closer to taking action on it than you were yesterday or will be tomorrow. You think resistance isn't real? Resistance will bury you.
Yeah. I listen to the War of Art at least once a year, and it's motivational, right? It's the motivational equivalent of the trainer at the gym, saying one more, come on, you can do it. Oh, how dare you, flabby, or whatever. I don't know. I've never actually had a personal trainer. Is that how it works? I don't know. No, but that is The War of Art, and it's fantastic. It's a short read. The audiobook is only about 2.5 hours long, and it's broken up into these little vignettes, which are really, really easy to digest. So that is The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. All right, the next book I want to talk about is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Bleep. Not giving an F. I'm not going to say it because I want to keep, the podcast, from getting an explicit tag or whatever. But just fair warning, if you get this book, they don't censor the F-bomb, and that's kind of part of the point. This book is all about changing the way you think about your priorities, the way you think about things that you put your energy into. So it's not about the art of not caring about anything. It's about the art of caring about things you really should be caring about, things that you should be caring about, things that you should have, that you have control over. And so that's what this book is all about. And I really enjoyed it. And again, if language is a trigger for you, then probably should steer clear. I don't think there is a clean version of this. It's almost kind of defeats the point. But I absolutely, I recently read this, and it has shot up super quickly. I will probably add this to my yearly read list at least once a year. I can see this. I will say it kind of trails off kind of at the end, and maybe it's just the it's a barrage of motivation. And so by the end, I was feeling a little numb. Maybe I should have split it up over a longer period of time. But I do have a clip from here, and I'll bleep out any bad words. And so this is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Flip.
So, Mark, what the is the point of this book anyway? This book will help you think a little bit more clearly about what you're choosing to find important in life and what you're choosing to find unimportant. I believe that today we're facing a psychological epidemic, one in which people no longer realize it's okay for things to suck sometimes. I know that sounds intellectually lazy on the surface, but I promise you, it's a life and death sort of issue. Because when we believe that it's not okay for things to suck sometimes, then we unconsciously start blaming ourselves. We start to feel as though something is inherently wrong with us, which drives us to all sorts of overcompensation, like buying 40 pairs of shoes, or downing Xanax with a vodka chaser on a Tuesday night, or shooting up a school bus full of kids. This belief that it's not okay to be inadequate sometimes is the source of the growing feedback loop from hell that is coming to dominate our culture. The idea of not giving a is a simple way of reorienting our expectations for life and choosing what is important and what is not. Developing this ability leads to something I like to think of as a kind of practical enlightenment. No, not that airy-fairy, eternal bliss, end-of-all-suffering bullshit kind of enlightenment. On the contrary, I see practical enlightenment as becoming comfortable with the idea that some suffering is always inevitable. That no matter what you do, life is comprised of failures, loss, regrets, and even death. Because once you become comfortable with all the shit that life throws at you, and it will throw a lot of shit, trust me, you become invincible in a sort of low-level spiritual way. After all, the only way to overcome pain is to first learn how to bear it. This book doesn't give a about alleviating your problems or your pain, and that is precisely why you will know it's being honest. This book is not some guide to greatness. It couldn't be, because greatness is merely an illusion in our minds, a made-up destination that we obligate ourselves to pursue, our own psychological Atlantis. Instead, this book will turn your pain into a tool, your trauma into power, and your problems into slightly better problems. That is real progress. Think of it as a guide to suffering and how to do it better, more meaningfully, with more compassion and more humility. It's a book about moving lightly despite your heavy burdens, resting easier with your greatest fears, laughing at your tears as you cry them. This book will not teach you how to gain or achieve, but rather how to lose and let go. It will teach you to take inventory of your life and scrub out all but the most important items. It will teach you to close your eyes and trust that you can fall backwards and still be okay. It will teach you to give fewer f***s. It will teach you to not try.
Yeah, and I promise the book isn't nearly as nihilistic as it might come off. But there's the one quote that as I was driving, listening to it, I believe I literally pulled over to the side of the road to write down this quote, which was, "Because there are an infinite number of things to see and to know, there are an infinite number of ways to feel like we don't measure up." Man, that hit me. There are an infinite number of things to know, but that also means an infinite number of ways to feel like we don't measure up. It was huge. It was huge for me. So The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F by Mark Manson. Check it out. Check it out. If you can stomach the salty language, check it out. The next one I want to talk about, the next book, is The Creative Quest by Questlove. Now, Questlove is a drummer and a musician and a band leader and a music director and an artist and composer himself. But this book isn't necessarily about music. It's a reflection on creativity through the lens of his musical journey. Now, I have liked Questlove from the beginning. I've been listening to The Roots since way back, like Do You Want More? And even before then, when they were essentially a jazz trio with a rapper. And I've always admired Questlove as a drummer as a person, as a music director, the fact that he's a band leader and on drums, his playing is impeccable, and just his outlook, and also, he's a bigger guy like me. And so we are shaped the same. I know that's weird to say, but I felt a kinship with him on that. I hope that's okay to say and not weird, but, I've always admired and respected Questlove. And when he released Creative Quest, I put it on my wish list. And then when it became available, yes, I listened to it. And like I said, so it's an exploration of creativity through the lens of his music career and some of the topics: mentors, networking, curation, marketing, success and failure. And yeah, so here is a clip of Questlove reading The Creative Quest.
What I've learned is my approach to creativity is unlike most other people's. I don't know if it's better or worse, but I know that it's different. Largely because my experience has pulled me through all these disparate disciplines, sometimes without much advanced preparation. Books about creativity, at least before this one, tend to fall into two broad categories. On one hand, there are books that treat creativity from a straightforward how-to stance. How do you make a best-selling record? How do you write a blockbuster screenplay? How can any average citizen tap into their creative instincts? On the other hand, there are books that look at creativity as a therapeutic endeavor. How do you come up with ideas that make you a better and more confident person in your everyday life? I wanted to write a book that does both at the same time. I have worked as a creative professional since I was in my teens, and I feel compelled by each of these capacities: creative and professional. Art doesn't have to be something you do only behind closed doors for personal spiritual gain. But it also isn't simply a product-based process that's at the mercy of the market. I live and work at the intersection of art and commerce. Mm-hmm. I want to show people how I learned to move along two tracks at once, how I kept taking personal risk in my art while at the same time negotiating the ins and outs of commercial success. The result is this book, which is my story of understanding creativity and succeeding in creative endeavors. I want to use my experiences, not only my own success and failures, but the challenges faced by and overcome by others, to help readers and listeners plot a course through the creative process. Everyone knows the broad shape of that process. Everyone knows that it starts with the idea and ends with the execution of that idea. But the quest of the artist is both more general and more specific. You have to know when to leap on an idea and when to leave it alone, when to keep it close to the vest and when to release it into the world, when to consolidate your gains and when to move into uncharted territory. Creativity isn't Candyland. It's more complicated than that. But there is a game board and general principles to follow, and I want to sketch it out for readers and listeners. In The Wizard of Oz, after Dorothy has been through the ringer, the Good Witch tells her that she has had the power to go home all along. All she had to do was click the heels of her ruby slippers. Now, I'm not going to Good Witch you guys and make you wait till the end. I'm going to tell you right at the beginning. You, and only you, have the power to make these creative exercises work. All I can do is drop hints, drop breadcrumbs, drop science. Pick up what you want when you want. This book, or audiobook, is in your hands. How it gets used is also in your hands. I won't make grand claims, but I will make this one. If you use this audiobook properly, you'll learn something. Even if what you learn is that you already believed in your own versions of many of these insights. That's one of the secrets that maybe a savvier marketer would say for a bonus track, but I'm sequencing first. Lots of these things will harmonize with the instincts you already have. I'll give you supporting evidence. I'll show you how other people have made similar practices, both to each other and to me. Most important, I'll encourage you to recognize that your own suspicions about creativity are probably correct. Getting to the point where you can credit your own intuition is an important part of moving forward creatively.
So that is the Creative Quest, and one of the quotes that he talked about, because he talked about creativity and using essentially reference materials. And one of the things that he says is, in order to learn to create, you have to learn to recreate. And so is essentially, my own philosophy on compositional modeling and using references. And so to hear that reinforced from somebody so successful and at his level, I thought was, it was really, really good. So that is Questlove's Creative Quest. All right. And so then the last book that I want to check out is Build for Tomorrow by Jason Feifer, an action plan for embracing courage, adapting fast, and future-proofing your career. And I really grew to love this book. I heard him, I believe, on a podcast interview with Graham Cochran and Graham Cochran's podcast, and he talks about the 4 stages of change. Stage 1, panic. Stage 2, adaptation. Stage 3, a new normal. And stage 4, wouldn't go back. So from an entrepreneurial standpoint, it's about like the business changing and trends and all of that. But from a musical, compositional, music industry kind of perspective, things are always changing. Always change. There's always, briefs are changing, trends are changing, and, tools are changing right now. AI is really shaking up the whole industry. And I just, ironically, just listened to Eric and Steve's Make Music Income podcast episode on AI. And so it's easy to kind of panic. Oh my gosh, things are changing. But it's okay. And so Jason's book on how to embrace change and how to adapt to it so that you're never at a loss for what to do next, where to go, and how to move forward. Panic, adaptation, new normal, and then wouldn't go back. So here is Jason Feifer reading from Build for Tomorrow.
You know the feeling. Change comes and we feel powerless. It's like fighting an invisible army in the darkness. Where do we even begin? What is even the problem? We don't feel like we have the time to truly understand the situation, and so all we want to do is make it stop. Then we make one of 2 irrational decisions. We either go into a defensive crouch and do absolutely nothing, or we make a rash decision that we hope will solve everything. Neither option tends to work out well. In this first section of the book, we'll explore where the panic comes from and how to calm it. But first, let's look at how panic can compound into gigantic mistakes. And the result, in one case, was pink margarine. In the mid-1800s, the French Emperor Napoleon III wanted a butter-like substance that could travel easily with his soldiers. He offered an award to anyone who could make it. And in 1869, a chemist named Hippolyte Honoreé cashed in. He created a concoction out of beef tallow that spread like butter, and he named it oleomargarine. Soon, this new food, first called oleo and later called margarine, traveled across the Atlantic, where it became a lifeline for many Americans. If you're thinking about the early 19th century working-class person, what they had to eat was a crust of stale bread, says Megan Elias, the director of the gastronomy program at Boston University. And putting some kind of fat on that not only made it go down a little easier, but it also gave them nutrients that they weren't getting otherwise. These people may have preferred butter, but that was rarely an option. Butter was prohibitively expensive then, and because this was an era before refrigeration, there was no way to store it for long anyway. Margarine, on the other hand, was cheap and fatty. It was valuable. The butter industry saw this and panicked. In 1874, the industry declared that every measure must be taken to ensure what it called supremacy of the dairy in our agriculture. And so they hit the streets. They started fear campaigns, trying to convince people that margarine was unsafe. By the mid-1800s, they'd helped 17 states pass some kind of law to regulate margarine, and 7 states had outright banned its manufacture and sale. In 1886, Congress passed the Oleomargarine Act, which made the stuff far more expensive to produce and sell. Lobbyists then convinced many states to mandate that margarine be dyed an unappealing color, usually pink or black, but also red and brown, so that it would look unappetizing. Now, maybe you say, that's not panic, that's just fierce competition. But I disagree. The butter industry could have stepped back and explored why people preferred this cheap butter-like substance. It could have taken steps to make its own product cheaper and more accessible, thereby expanding its marketplace. Hell, refrigeration technology was right around the corner. An innovative butter executive could have pioneered this new cooling process and been a hero to all. But instead, Big Butter saw a change and wanted to stop it. That's panic.
Yeah, and the book is full of anecdotes and examples. There's one specifically about John Philip Sousa and like the player piano So yeah. This book is fantastic, and I highly, highly recommend. I recommend all of these books. I recommend all of them, whether it's Miracle Morning for Writers, The War of Art, The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F, Creative Quest, and Build for Tomorrow. These are 5 books that have really, really stuck with me to the point where I find myself pulling from them when I'm teaching, when I'm doing coaching sessions or whatever in the podcast. I'm drawing repeatedly from these. And so the Build for Tomorrow, I think, is so vital for us as composers in an industry that is largely dependent on technology, right? Like what I'm doing right now would not have been possible 30 years ago, 20 years ago. Could not have done what I'm doing right now. It would have been prohibitively expensive, large. I couldn't have done it. And so our industry as composers is so dependent on technology, so dependent on trends that learning how to navigate through those changes and as best as we can future-proof our careers, I think is absolutely invaluable. So that is Build for Tomorrow. Those are the 5 books that I constantly draw on. Now, there are a handful of other books that I did want to mention. These are honorable mentions. And the first one is Write, Submit, Forget, Repeat by Dean Krippaehne. And Dean Krippaehne is a production music composer, and he has a couple of other books, which I highly recommend, Demystifying the Cue and Demystifying the Genre, but those are specifically music books. And so I didn't mention them here. But Dean's book, Write, Submit, Forget, Repeat, is much more, it's more in line with Questlove's book, The Creative Quest, because it's about sustainable creativity, how to navigate the industry so that you can keep doing what you're doing. And so when you get a return, when you get a rejection, when you get a creative block, that it doesn't derail your entire process. And like Steven Pressfield's book, it is short kind of anecdotes, vignettes. It's very digestible, very easy to get through, and it's just full of amazing career advice. I highly recommend that you check out, go check out all of Dean's books, but specifically as far as non-specific music books, Write, Submit, Forget, Repeat. And I'm looking forward. I've recently sat down with Dean, and he's going to be joining us on the podcast a little bit later in the year. So can't wait to have him. He's also going to be doing a workshop for us. So really, really excited to have him. And another book that I do recommend by Julia Cameron is called The Artist Way. And The Artist Way feels like the ancestor, only because it's older, but it's like the proto Miracle Morning. And the idea that you create a routine and that you can do things in yourself to help motivate, to help your productivity, to help your creative output. It's really like a methodology or pedagogy, I would say, to a creative individual, and prescribes routines, prescribes, and one of the things that I have been doing, and I need to do better, but I've embraced, is the morning pages, the idea of writing out every morning by hand, kind of stream of consciousness, almost like a mental purging, so that you can, not mental purging, almost like a mental or creative flossing, right? There's detritus floating around in your consciousness when you get up, and you have all these things that you need to take care of. But by doing a morning page, I think she says 3 pages, doing 3 morning pages helps to just cleanse that out, among many, many other things. I've not finished through this book. I'm still working through it. It's like a 12-week program, and still working through it. But the morning pages have really, really stuck with me. And a lot of folks that I know have worked through the Artist's Way. Like I said, it's kind of the proto Miracle Morning. And then finally, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Napoleon Hill was one of the originators of the mastermind concept, and the title "Think and Grow Rich" feels a little motivational postery, just like name it, claim it, speak it into existence. And I do believe in affirmations and whiteboarding and believing. I absolutely subscribe to those kind of things. But the book was written in like the 30s, I think 37 or 38, and is a fantastic book in the same way that The Artist's Way is a fantastic book, where Napoleon breaks down these different concepts of containing and controlling our mental output, our thought process, so that we can have more direct impact on our careers and ultimately towards wealth. I mean, he doesn't mince words. He's like, everybody has a right and a capacity to succeed and to grow wealth. And so that's the angle of the book. It's really good. But one of the reasons I really wanted to mention it is because it is baked into the concepts are baked into much of what we do in the 52 Qs mastermind. And so, and I think he actually coined the term mastermind, the mastermind, multiple creatives, multiple individuals coming together to kind of work through problems or work through processes, and the collective consciousness of everybody together creates a much more impactful result than one person on their own. And I've seen it this week. As I'm recording this, tonight is our final session for our winter 2023 mastermind group, and we've got 7 folks in there this month, and it's been an amazing 12 weeks. I said this 3 months. It's been amazing 12 weeks. We've been going since January. We meet for a couple of hours every single week. There's weekly topics and discussion posts and feedback, and it's really, really fantastic. And it's really hard to kind of imagine that I'm not going to be seeing these people every week, because they quickly become a real part of your life. And so that mastermind concept was coined by Napoleon Hill. And so I did want to mention. So those are my books. Those are the books that have really, really impacted me on my career. I like the fact that they're not music books, because I do enough musical study, enough musical research, and having influences outside of the musical landscape, I think can really help your career. Much in the same way that, if you want to grow your creativity as a composer, go learn to paint, or go learn to sculpt, or go learn to write a book. I think it's all connected. I think creativity is absolutely connected. So those are my books. What about you? What are some of the books that you really have impacted you the most? I would love to hear from you. Let me know in the comments below. I do read all those comments, and I would love to hear from about the books that have really, really affected your career. So we're going to take a quick break, but when we return, we're going to be checking out a lush orchestral cue written by 52Q's community member, Dan Maynard. But first, here is Mrs. 52Q's Shannon Croft to tell you all about how you can join the community.
Hey y'all, I'm Shannon Croft, and I want to tell you that the 52Qs podcast is made possible by viewers and listeners just like you, composers and producers who are looking for a better way to connect and collaborate. You see, 52Qs isn't just another website selling static, pre-recorded videos to a mass audience. It's a fun, vibrant, and positive community that comes together online for sharing cues, getting feedback, and discussing what's up in the production music industry. You'll find both personalized feedback and live interaction, which are the best and fastest ways to grow your skills and earn more placements. The best part is that the 52Qs community is absolutely free. And when you're ready to take your career to the next level, we offer friends and family subscriptions, which unlock weekly live streams, live interactive group feedback sessions, monthly interactive workshops, and more. Head over to 52qs.com and sign up today. And while you're there, check out our personalized feedback videos, private lessons, and of course, merch. I can't wait to see you at 52qs.com.
That was Mythcal Aeolia by Dan Maynard. Thank you so much for sending this along. As I mentioned, this was submitted during our week 11 feedback thread. And Dan says, I think mine walks a fine line between production music and full-blown orchestral with a Celtic vocal vibe. And I really enjoyed some really nice, lush string arranging. I thought this was fantastic. Loudness was getting up there. I'm a little worried that things are a little overly compressed, especially. It just feels like it's pumping a little bit. Yeah, it feels like the compression's pumping down a little bit. So I would be careful with that. Also, probably want to make sure that we clean up that little silence there at the beginning. Yeah, and MIDI flute is so tough to pull off. We recently talked about that a couple of weeks ago, that MIDI flute. And I think we could do a little bit more, maybe kind of breathe it in a little bit in and out. Like that last note is shaped, but I think we could have probably shaped a little bit more of some of the other notes here. And so just so that breathes in a little bit more. I like the harp work, and I like the melody as well. I think it really works. Same with that oboe. Would have been maybe nice to bring in the flute. So we start off with kind of just the flute and then the oboe, and then bring those together here before we hand off to the orchestra. Maybe? And I would have liked to have seen, because we're in orchestral territory, we can get away with this, would have liked to have seen a little bit of rallentando there, just pulling down the tempo just a little bit. And then, because if this were a live thing, the conductor would kind of breathe that, and then we're in together. And one of the things we need to be careful with here, your oboe is really, really loud. And it's not too loud, but hear me out. It's loud because we know how loud the instruments in an orchestral stage should sound. And realistically speaking, unless this was a concerto with the oboe player kind of out in front, the oboe wouldn't be this loud in context of the orchestra. And I think it's one of the things that kind of it's one of the things that kind of betrays the artifice of MIDI performances like this. It's an uncanny valley thing. We're not used to hearing an oboe that well defined and that clear in the midst of a dense orchestral texture with all the string. Because if you got an entire string section all moving their bows, like we have here, then your woodwinds would be down a little bit further in the mix. And this is something that we can easily do in the mix, in the DAW. We can easily make the flute and the woodwinds as loud as we possibly want. But it's just a little detail like that. We're not supposed to hear the oboe that clear above the strings. This honestly bringing in the vocals here, and I like the vocal patch that we're using. It's really, really good. That first note is a little squirrely as far as pitch. And I think it's just the initial attack. There's a breathiness to it and leans into it. Some of the legatos are really nice as far as the legato transitions. But you want to make sure that you hand curate each one of those transitions so that it feels like a singer as opposed to a MIDI instrument. But back to my original point, I'm a little worried that we've changed gears pretty dramatically. So we've harmonically switched gears. We're bringing in new textures. And to your question, when you posted this, is like, where is this in terms of production music and orchestral? This is one of the things that would probably or could give an editor a little bit of a challenge because it dramatically changes tone and vibe. I feel like the emotion of this is different than this. Right? It's a different emotional beat. And in terms of production music, those are the types of things we should probably avoid. I like it. So your choice is, do you do you bring in some of those types of sounds? Can we, or should we, I should even say, should we even entertain the idea of bringing in the vocals and seeding them in earlier so that when we make a harmonic change here around the minute mark or so, that's really the only shift, right? So if we bring in the vocals a little bit earlier, then by the time we do want to shift gears, then we will, it's not too much it's not too much all at once. Does that make sense? I like it. Other than the compression kind of kicking in a little bit. And some of the percussion is a little dark. Like right around through here. It got some build up right through here, so I would be careful. I'm going to back it up a little bit. Yeah, I'm losing the beat a little bit, and I think it's that horn line. It's not solidly like in time. If I were a conductor, I'd be come on horns, come on, you're dragging the beat, horns. And this little type of a transition, this definitely feels like an underscore type of a transition. It's beautifully done. And then we've returned to our original melody. So at the end of the day, I really like this. And I even like the title. I don't know if it was Mythcal Aeolia or Mythical, but I think it's a good title. I just think ultimately we have this cue, and then we have, let me give you a different color. We have this cue. This cue is one thing, and these other pieces are another thing. And it just really feels like two separate cues, which you can get away with that, in an orchestral piece. But as far as something in for production music, might give editors a little bit of a challenge. But regardless, I really appreciate you sending that along, Dan, and thank you, and really good to see you. Like I mentioned, this was submitted over into our Week 11 feedback thread. We put feedback threads every single week up at 52Qs. It's free to join. And like right now, we've got, let's see, how many folks have chimed in? We have like 60, 70 or so posts. And so I'm going to be choosing a cue from these submissions, and looking forward to checking that out. So maybe that will be your cue. And if you found that feedback helpful, then why don't you head over to 52qs.com/coaching, and you can order up your own feedback video, similar to what I just did with Dan, but it is a 15-minute video MP4 that I send to you where I unpack your cue, talk about everything from titles to mix to structure to arrangement to melodic choices, harmonic choices. Is it a right fit for production music? This is something that I offer. So head over to 52qs.com/coaching, and you can order up your own. And while you're there, you can check out my other coaching services, such as the one-on-one Zoom sessions that I host, and our 52Qs Mastermind, which today, as I mentioned earlier, tonight is the last night of our winter mastermind. The spring mastermind kicks off April 3rd. And so registration is opening. I think there are still like 4 or 5 seats left. And the mastermind group, we get together, like I mentioned, every single week. via Zoom. And so we have our last meeting, and here is all of the past archives, and you could see we have so much fun, and we talk about industry topics, and we really take super deep dive, career-minded, focused attention to a career as a production music composer. We put discussion posts every week, and we talk about these topics, everything from referencing to originality to peer review. And so would absolutely love to have you with us. Why don't you head over to 52cues.com/mastermind, and you can join us. And yeah, would love to have you. But that's going to do it for me today. You don't want to miss next week. Next week, I'm so excited to bring a special guest onto the podcast, Josh Siegel, who is an editor who lives in LA, and he's done some really big shows, claim to fame, Love is Blind, She's the Boss, the Bradshaw Bunch, just to name a few. But Josh is going to be joining me, and we're talking, how can you make your editor happy? What do we need to do as composers to make the lives of our editors as easy as possible? And here's Josh's unique perspective. He's not a musician. And this is him saying this. He is not a musician. He is an editor, but he deals with music, and we talk about tips, strategies, myths, best practices for making your editor love your music. So you don't want to miss that. But that's going to do it for me this week. Again, a huge word of thanks to the family, friends, and patrons of 52Qs who help keep all of this going. If you're interested in more of that, head over to 52Qs.com and find out a ton more. So I hope that you had a fantastic week 11, and I hope that your week 12 is going well. And just remember, folks, that I know and believe and trust that the universe has amazing plans just for you. Until next time, peace. The 52Qs podcast is copyright 2023 818 Studios, all rights reserved. The music played on the podcast is copyright of their respective owners and is used with permission and for educational purposes only. For more information, including joining the community and submitting your cue for consideration on the podcast, head over to 52Qs.com.